In the stillness of forgotten chapel, the sound of iron scraping against stone shattered the silence. Beneath her trembling hands, Laura Mitchell felt the cold ring of a trapdoor give way. The ancient floor groaned, opening to reveal stairs descending into darkness, a secret untouched for 80 years. She had bought the crumbling monastery for just $1, hoping to escape poverty. But what she was about to uncover buried beneath its chapel would pull her into a storm of greed, history, and danger that no one could prepare her for. Before we begin, if you love mysterious real estate stories, hidden secrets, and unbelievable discoveries, make sure to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss what happens in this story. It began with a letter Laura almost threw away. In her small apartment, sandwiched between unpaid bills and junk mail, sat an envelope that carried the weight of generations. The thick cream-colored paper, the embossed law firm seal, all spoke of a world far removed from her exhausted reality. As a single mother working endless shifts at a roadside diner, Laura had learned to distrust anything that sounded too good to be true. That morning, she was too tired to dream. Her son, Marcus, just 12 years old, had fallen asleep at the kitchen table again, his textbooks scattered across a floor they could barely afford to keep. The refrigerator hummed emptily. The future seemed like something happening to other people. But that letter, it waited. When she finally tore it open, her life changed forever. Inside, a formal notice declared that she had inherited a property from a distant relative, a woman named Magdalene Rothschild, someone she had never met or even heard of. The letter claimed Magdalene was her great-great-aunt, and upon her passing, a single heir had been found. That heir was Laura Mitchell. The property, the letter stated, was located in the northern hills of Vermont, a former monastery, vast, ancient, and abandoned. The transfer fee? Exactly $1. At first, Laura laughed. It had to be a scam. But as she cross-checked the law firm's name online, called their number, and heard a weary-sounding attorney confirm every detail, disbelief slowly gave way to a fragile spark of hope. The man had told her plainly. The building was falling apart. The roof leaked. The locals whispered about it being cursed. But it was hers, free and clear. For a woman who had spent years trapped in cycles of rent, bills, and fatigue, that sentence sounded like salvation. That night, Laura barely slept. She stared at the ceiling and imagined something she hadn't dared in years, a future that wasn't defined by struggle. 2 weeks later, everything she owned fit into the back of a battered Honda Civic. Marcus sat beside her, clutching a road atlas, while she drove north through winding country roads that grew narrower and quieter with every mile. As they climbed into the Vermont hills, the world seemed to fall away behind them. Then, around a bend in the gravel road, the monastery appeared, a fortress of gray stone and history. It stood alone on its hilltop, like a sleeping relic from another century. Ivy crawled up its crumbling walls. The bell tower leaned slightly, a skeletal hand pointing toward the clouds. Broken stained glass windows glimmered faintly in the late sunlight, fragments of forgotten prayers catching fire and color. It was both breathtaking and foreboding, and it was theirs. The first night, they slept in sleeping bags on the floor of what used to be the monks' quarters. The air smelled of damp stone and time. Wind whistled through cracked windows like whispers. Somewhere in the dark, the building creaked, old bones remembering old pain. Laura lay awake listening. She didn't know yet that beneath her feet, sealed under the chapel floor, something vast and priceless waited. Something that would make strangers travel across states to find her, and others willing to kill to possess it. In the morning, she began exploring. Dust and decay coated everything. Long tables, candle holders, warped pews. But beyond the ruin, she could sense a kind of quiet dignity, as if the building had been waiting for someone to remember it. In the chapel, sunlight pierced through the broken glass, scattering color across stone floors that seemed uneven and scarred by time. As she swept away debris near the altar, Laura noticed something unusual. One section of the floor looked different. The stones were a slightly different shade, their edges tighter, their texture smoother. She pressed her fingers against the seam. It moved slightly under pressure. She frowned and stood, unaware that this subtle detail, this faintly misaligned tile, was the first hint of the secret that would soon consume her life. For the next few days, Laura focused on making the place livable. She found a local handyman named Robert, an old craftsman with kind eyes and a quiet way about him. He helped fix leaks, restore the power, and patch windows while sharing pieces of local gossip about the monastery's strange history. The townsfolk, he said, avoided the place. They spoke of curses, of voices at night, of strange lights in the hills. But Laura wasn't superstitious. She was practical, desperate, and determined. Every hammer strike, every scrubbed floorboard, felt like reclaiming her life from the world that had forgotten her. Still, when night came, the silence pressed against her ears. She sometimes thought she heard footsteps echoing faintly down the hallways, doors closing far away, whispers just beyond her reach. She told herself it was the wind. But one evening, when Marcus had fallen asleep and the house was still, Laura returned to the chapel, drawn by something she couldn't name. She knelt near that uneven patch of stone again, ran her hand along its edges, and felt that faint, hollow echo beneath. Her heart raced. Something was under there. She didn't lift it that night. Not yet. But as she walked back upstairs, she couldn't stop thinking about it. What if her inheritance wasn't just a decaying monastery? What if it was hiding something more, something meant to stay buried? Above her, wind howled across the roof like a warning. Below her, the earth waited, holding its breath. For days, Laura tried to ignore the strange patch of floor in the chapel. She told herself there were more urgent things to worry about: repairing leaks, unpacking what little they owned, finding work in a town where everyone already knew everyone else. But her mind kept circling back to that uneven stone beneath the altar, the faint hollowness she'd felt when she tapped it. It became a quiet obsession. Every time she walked past the chapel, she felt the pull of it, like gravity was stronger there. Sometimes, while cleaning, she would pause and glance toward that section of the floor, convincing herself she would check it properly later. But each time she hesitated. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was waiting for her to discover it. The monastery was vast, echoing and alive with the sounds of age. Floors creaked where no one walked. Doors shifted slightly in their frames, as if pushed by invisible hands. At night, Laura could hear the sighs of the old wood, the faint dripping of water somewhere deep in the walls. She tried to rationalize every sound, but she couldn't deny the building had a presence, one that seemed to watch, to listen. Robert, the handyman, had started to grow more comfortable in her company. He worked long hours, fixing beams, running new wiring, patching leaks. He often muttered that the monastery had good bones and just needed patience. He told her stories about the monks who had lived there decades ago, reclusive men who rarely visited the nearby town, who were whispered to have kept secrets behind the chapel's thick walls. Laura smiled at the local folklore, but a part of her began to wonder if the stories carried a grain of truth. On the fourth night, long after Marcus had fallen asleep upstairs, she gave in to her curiosity. The chapel was dark except for her flashlight's narrow beam cutting through the dust. She moved carefully across the warped pews until she stood over the section of floor that had haunted her thoughts all week. Her breath sounded loud in the empty room. She knelt down, pressing her fingers to the stones again. They were colder than the surrounding floor, slick with years of moisture. As she traced the seam between them, her fingertips caught on a small gap, just wide enough to wedge in the tip of a screwdriver. Her hands trembled. She hesitated, the way anyone does when faced with the unknown, then pried gently. The stone shifted. The sound echoed like a sigh through the chapel. She froze, heart pounding, listening for movement upstairs. Nothing, only silence. Encouraged, she lifted the stone fully. Beneath it lay rotted wooden boards, damp and dark. She brushed away dust and cobwebs and found something unexpected. A small iron ring set into the wood. An anchor for something heavy. Laura sat back on her heels. The air felt thicker, colder. She could smell old earth and mildew rising from the cracks. Her flashlight beam trembled in her hand as she realized what she was looking at. This wasn't just an odd repair or misplaced tile. It was a door, a trapdoor, built into the chapel floor, and someone had gone to great effort to seal it beneath layers of stone. Her pulse raced. What could possibly be hidden here? Why would monks cover a passage beneath the altar? Logic told her to stop, to wait until morning, to bring Robert or call someone who knew about old architecture. But logic had no power over the pull of curiosity. She gripped the iron ring and pulled. At first, it didn't move. The wood was swollen from decades of moisture. She adjusted her footing, put her full weight into it, and pulled again. The ring shifted. A deep groan echoed through the chapel as the wood tore free from its resting place. The smell that rose from below was ancient, a mixture of cold stone, damp earth, and something metallic. Laura shone her flashlight down. Stone steps descended into blackness. Her breath caught. For a long moment, she simply stood there, frozen between wonder and fear. Then, as if in a trance, she set her flashlight's beam on the stairs and began to descend. Each step groaned under her weight. Dust spiraled to the beam of light like falling snow. Her shadow stretched and twisted across the walls. At the bottom, she found herself in a small stone chamber, a crypt of sorts. The air was heavy, thick with stillness. Shelves lined the walls, but most were empty, save for fragments of wood and ancient fabric eaten away by time. Her flashlight flickered across the far side of the room. There, under heavy tarps, lay a collection of large wooden crates stacked neatly, too neat to be random. Her heartbeat quickened. She approached slowly, pulling back one of the tarps. Dust billowed upward in a gray cloud. Beneath it, the crates waited, sealed with rusted nails, the wood warped but solid. She found a corner that looked weak and pried it open with the screwdriver still clutched in her hand. What she saw inside made her stumble backward. Under layers of oilcloth lay rows of solid silver bars, tarnished with age but unmistakably real. Each one bore strange stamped markings, foreign, historical, heavy with meaning. The light of her flashlight caught the dull gleam of the metal, and for a moment the entire crypt seemed to shimmer. Her mind reeled. Silver, dozens of bars in this crate alone, and there were more crates stacked behind it. Dozens, perhaps hundreds. She knelt and pulled the cloth back further. The bars were perfectly aligned, as though placed with ceremonial care. There were markings, numbers, initials, perhaps insignias of the past. She couldn't make sense of them, but they told her one thing clearly. This was no modern stash. It was historical, deliberate, and old enough to have been forgotten. Laura's breath came in shallow bursts. She had just uncovered a fortune. But with every heartbeat, new questions rose to meet her discovery. Why was it hidden here, beneath the chapel floor? Who had buried it? And why cover it so completely that no one would ever stumble upon it? Her flashlight beam wavered as her thoughts spiraled. If this silver had been hidden for decades, maybe even generations, then someone had gone to great lengths to keep it secret. Secrets that old rarely came without danger. Something caught her eye near one of the shelves, a small wooden box, half buried under dust. It looked out of place, intentionally set apart from the crates. She brushed it clean and opened it carefully. Inside were old papers wrapped in waxcloth, letters perhaps, or journals. She unfolded one and saw faded handwriting dated 1942. The words were cramped but legible. It was a diary entry, written by someone calling himself Brother Augustine. The first line spoke of prayers, of fasting, of the war in Europe and the tension it brought even to the secluded monastery. The tone shifted deeper into the pages. Urgency, secrecy, fear. Augustine wrote of visitors arriving under cover of night, men carrying a cargo they called a burden. Laura read further, her pulse quickening. The diary described silver, smuggled out of Europe to fund a resistance movement. The brothers had hidden it beneath their chapel, sealing it away to protect it from those who hunted it. The entries ended abruptly months later with 3 haunting words. They know now. Laura's hands trembled as she closed the diary. The silence in the crypt pressing around her, heavy and suffocating. She realized she wasn't just standing in an old monastery's basement. She was standing in the grave of a secret buried since World War II, a secret people had likely died to protect. She glanced once more at the glittering stacks of silver, the hidden histories sleeping beneath her feet, and felt both awe and terror rise within her. If what the diary said was true, she had uncovered something far greater than treasure. It wasn't just silver. It was evidence of a war's hidden chapter, and possibly the reason strangers would soon come looking for her. Above, the floorboards creaked faintly. She froze, flashlight shaking in her hand, her ears straining for sound. The monastery had always been noisy, but this was different. Slower, heavier, deliberate. Footsteps. Someone else was there. Laura switched off the flashlight. Her breath caught in her throat, and stood in the pitch black, surrounded by millions in forgotten silver and ghosts of men who had hidden it for reasons she did not yet understand. And for the first time since arriving, she felt it, not just fear, but the deep primal certainty that she was not alone. The discovery beneath the chapel changed everything. For the rest of the night, Laura couldn't sleep. She sat in silence on the cold stone floor of her new home, the weight of that single silver bar heavy in her lap. Above her, the monastery groaned and sighed with the shifting wind. But her thoughts were too loud to notice. She had found treasure, real treasure. More money than she could even comprehend. Enough to end years of exhaustion, fear, and struggle. Enough to give her son a life untouched by the kind of poverty that defined every chapter of hers. Yet she couldn't shake the sense that this wasn't hers to keep. The diary's words replayed in her mind. A story of monks, refugees, and secret cargoes smuggled out of a war. Silver meant for a cause, not for a stranger decades later to stumble upon. At dawn, she replaced the stones exactly as she had found them, wiping away all trace of disturbance. No one could know, not yet. She would research, she told herself. She would find out where the silver came from, what its story really was. Then she would decide what to do. Days passed quietly. She kept up the appearance of normal life. Repairs, grocery runs into a small nearby town, afternoons spent helping Marcus with his schoolwork. But every time she entered the chapel, her eyes drifted toward the trapdoor. It called to her like a secret whispering through stone. She spent her nights online, reading fragments of history, smuggling routes across Europe, resistance movements, stories of lost wartime treasures. There were hints of silver shipments disappearing during the 1940s, funds meant to support freedom fighters against the Nazi occupation. Many had vanished without trace, seized, buried, or lost in transit. Her heart pounded at the parallels. If the silver beneath her chapel was one of those shipments, then she wasn't just sitting on a fortune. She was sitting on a ghost of history. Then, one afternoon, the peace shattered. She was in the overgrown garden, pulling weeds with Marcus, when she heard the sound of tires crunching on gravel. A sleek black sedan rolled up the driveway, elegant, silent, and far too expensive to belong in this forgotten corner of Vermont. A man stepped out, silver-haired, well-dressed, polished in a way that screamed confidence. He smiled as he approached, but there was something in his eyes, sharp, assessing, rehearsed. He introduced himself as a historian, claiming he specialized in European resistance movements during World War II. He said he'd heard someone had inherited the monastery and thought he might ask a few questions for his research. His voice was polite, too polite. He spoke of archives, of history, of faith and secrets. But beneath his gentle words was a tension, a curiosity that felt too focused. When he asked whether Laura had found any old documents or items of value on the property, her chest tightened. She smiled faintly, pretending to misunderstand, pretending she was just a woman cleaning dust out of an old ruin. But his eyes, those cold, intelligent eyes, seemed to search her face for cracks in her composure. He handed her a card embossed with gold lettering. Victor Ashford, Historical Acquisitions Consultant, Boston. When he left, his handshake lingered just long enough to feel like a warning. That night, Laura couldn't shake the feeling that the walls themselves were listening. She turned off lights, checked locks, and whispered to herself that she was overreacting. But something about that man's calmness felt wrong. He hadn't come to satisfy curiosity. He had come to find something, and he already suspected what it was. 2 days later, another visitor appeared. This time it was a woman. She introduced herself as a genealogist researching families connected to the monastery's early history. She was polite, too, and carried an air of professionalism. But her questions weren't about family trees. They were about the building's foundations, its previous owners, and whether anything interesting had turned up since Laura's arrival. She smiled the whole time, but her eyes were as calculating as Victor's. Then came a third stranger, a man claiming to be an antiques dealer from New York. He offered to buy any religious artifacts or old furnishings Laura might find. He wandered too freely through the halls, touching walls, inspecting the chapel's floor, tracing his fingers along the stone like someone searching for a map. Laura began to feel trapped inside her own inheritance. Each visit left her more certain that these weren't coincidences. Word had spread. Somehow, someone knew or at least suspected that the monastery held a secret worth chasing. She stopped answering her door. Robert noticed her unease. The handyman had become something like an ally in this isolated world of crumbling stone and whispering corridors. He asked if she was all right, but she brushed it off. She wasn't ready to tell anyone, not yet. Instead, she made a plan. Each night after Marcus fell asleep, she returned to the crypt, documenting everything. She photographed the crates, the silver bars, the diary, every marking and inscription. She took inventory, 43 crates in total. Each crate contained between 20 and 30 bars. Her rough estimate was staggering, millions of dollars in value. But with each photograph, her anxiety deepened. She imagined someone watching her through the chapel windows. Imagined headlights cutting through the night at the foot of the hill. And then, one evening, those headlights appeared. She and Marcus were eating dinner when she heard the sound of engines outside. Not one, but two. They rolled up the gravel drive, slow and deliberate. Laura froze, her fork halfway to her mouth. The sound of car doors followed. Then footsteps. She turned off the lights. The house plunged into shadow. Marcus stared at her, confused and scared, but she pressed a finger to her lips. Outside, voices murmured, low, confident, businesslike. Then came the metallic click of tools. Someone was working on the front door lock. Her heart hammered. She grabbed her phone, whispering urgently to the dispatcher, who answered on the other end. She described intruders. Fear thick in her throat. The police were 20 minutes away, maybe more. Downstairs, the sound of the lock giving way echoed through the hall. The door swung open. For silhouettes entered the darkened monastery. They moved with purpose, not looters or vandals, but professionals. The lead figure, a woman, stepped into the shaft of moonlight streaming through the window. Her expression was calm, her eyes cold and measured. Laura could see it in an instant. These were not ordinary thieves. They knew exactly what they had come for. The woman spoke calmly, her voice cutting through the stillness like glass. She mentioned the silver, casually, as though confirming a fact. She offered a deal, a fraction of the treasure's worth in exchange for immediate cooperation. Laura stayed hidden in the shadows, heart pounding. $500,000, the woman said. Walk away, forget everything, and the rest would disappear quietly. The offer lingered in the air like temptation itself. $500,000. Safety. Freedom. The life she dreamed of. But even from her hiding place, Laura could feel the danger in that woman's composure. The quiet menace of someone who didn't bluff. And then, faintly at first, came the sound of sirens in the distance. The woman's expression changed, frustration, then calculation. She motioned to her men, and they retreated as swiftly as they'd come. The car sped off into the night, just as blue and red lights climbed the driveway. When the police arrived, Laura told them only part of the truth. Intruders, threats, a break-in. But she didn't mention the silver. She couldn't. Not yet. That night, she sat awake beside her son, every creak of the monastery amplified by adrenaline. The secret beneath her floor had become a curse. The silver that could have saved their lives had drawn danger instead. Outside, wind moved through the trees, carried with it the faint echo of voices that no longer lived. And for the first time, Laura wondered if some secrets were never meant to be uncovered at all, because once unearthed, they refused to stay buried. Morning arrived like a ghost retreating from the dark. Light spilled across the gray stones of the monastery, faint and cold, as if reluctant to touch a place that had seen too much. The events of the night before still hung in the air. The broken lock, the echo of boots on the stairs, the whisper of strangers offering her $500,000 for silence. The police had come and gone, their flashing lights dissolving into dawn. They had promised patrols. But Laura knew it wouldn't be enough. People who arrived in expensive sedans in the middle of the night didn't care about local law enforcement. They cared about one thing: what lay beneath her chapel. The trapdoor was no longer a discovery. It was a target. Laura spent that morning moving through the monastery like a woman possessed. She checked every lock, every door, every window. The once beautiful property that felt like a gift now seemed more like a prison. Even Marcus, who had tried to stay brave, moved silently through the halls, watching her with wide, uncertain eyes. When Robert arrived to continue his repairs, Laura almost told him everything. Almost. But something stopped her. Trust was a dangerous currency now. She offered him coffee and said nothing of the intruders, only that the police had advised better locks. Robert, perceptive as always, didn't press her. He simply nodded and went back to work. But inside, Laura's thoughts churned like a storm. The diary, the silver, the story of the monks hiding something in 1942. For the resistance, the brother had written. She needed to understand. If she couldn't trust strangers, maybe she could trust the past. That afternoon, after Marcus started on his schoolwork, Laura drove into town. The nearest library was small, a converted Victorian home that smelled of dust and wood polish. The woman behind the desk looked surprised to see anyone walk through the door. The local archives were modest, but in one corner stood a filing cabinet marked Historical Society, Whitaker's Ridge. Inside were yellow clippings, town records, and forgotten fragments of history. Laura spent hours there, piecing together the monastery story. It had been founded in the early 1800s by monks who had fled religious persecution in Europe. For more than a century, it had served as a quiet refuge of prayer and isolation. The brothers ran a small school for local children, tended orchards, and offered food to the poor. Then, in the 1940s, everything changed. She found an article dated 1943. The headline read, "Monastery Investigated in Wartime Theft." Her pulse quickened. The article was brief. Wartime censorship had hidden the details, but confirmed that federal agents had once raided the monastery after reports of missing precious metals. Several monks had been questioned but released without charges. The investigation closed quietly, and by the 1950s, the monastery was abandoned. No mention of silver being found. Laura sat back in her chair, staring at the brittle newspaper. If the government hadn't recovered it, the silver had remained hidden, sealed beneath the chapel for decades until she stumbled upon it. The story matched Brother Augustine's diary perfectly. What she'd found wasn't just money. It was part of the European resistance's secret network. Funds meant to fuel rebellion, to fight tyranny. Somehow, the war had ended, and the treasure had stayed buried, forgotten by history. But now it was back in the world, and people were searching for it again. As she left the library, the sky had turned the color of cold ash. The hilltop monastery loomed in the distance, silhouetted against the dying light. She drove home in silence, headlights carving through the fog. That night, after Marcus had gone to bed, Laura returned to the crypt. She carried a lantern this time, its soft golden glow casting long shadows against the walls. The crates were still there, untouched, silent witnesses to a promise made long ago. But now, she didn't just see bars of metal. She saw the weight of lives, of choices made in desperation. She examined one of the bars closely. Faint markings were stamped into its surface, a symbol she didn't recognize, a small eagle, numbers, and German words. Another bar bore a different mark, a triangle enclosing an unfamiliar letter. She took photographs of everything, the diary, the crates, the markings. Then she began to piece together the timeline. The diary entries had mentioned visitors, men arriving under cover of night, carrying silver they said must be hidden for the cause. The war had raged in Europe then. The monks had sheltered those who smuggled money to resistance fighters. The silver had been meant to sustain freedom. But someone had found out, and that had ended everything. The final entry, they know now, echoed in her head as she stared at crates. The monks must have been caught or scattered. The treasure sealed beneath the chapel, forgotten as decades passed. Her great-aunt, Magdalene Rothschild, had bought the property in the 1970s, probably knowing nothing of what slept beneath it. Laura's mind spun with possibilities. If this silver had belonged to a resistance network, could there still be records, somewhere in Europe, connecting it to those who had once risked their lives for it? And if so, did someone else already know that connection? The visitors, Victor Ashford, the so-called historian, the genealogist, the antiques dealer, and the woman who had broken into her home, they weren't random. They were threads from the same web, drawn to the same secret. The more Laura thought about it, the clearer it became. She was in the middle of a story that hadn't ended. And history, she realized, rarely stayed buried without a fight. The next morning brought another sign that she wasn't imagining things. A white envelope had been pushed under the monastery's front door. No return address. No name. Inside, a single sheet of paper bore a typed message. You have something that doesn't belong to you. Sell it quietly, or it will be taken loudly. Her hands shook as she read it. For the first time, she considered leaving. Packing up, taking Marcus, and disappearing. But where could they go? The monastery was all they had, and even if she left, the secret would remain. Others would find it, and she would have no control over how it ended. No, she couldn't run. If she wanted to protect her son, she needed to control the story. She began to document everything properly, not as treasure, but as evidence. The diary, the markings, the history. She uploaded copies to cloud storage, wrote notes, and created a digital trail that would be impossible to erase. If anyone tried to take it, she would have proof. As days turned to weeks, the fear didn't fade. Strange cars appeared at the bottom of the hill, headlights lingering too long. Once, she thought she saw someone watching from the tree-line, motionless, gone when she blinked. Robert noticed her tension. He asked if something had happened, and this time, she told him enough to make him stay. She spoke of visitors and threats, of the need for privacy and protection. He nodded solemnly and began reinforcing the doors and windows, installing better locks, even wiring a small alarm system. But at night, when the wind roared against the old monastery walls, Laura still felt exposed. The silver might have been hidden for 80 years, but secrets like that had gravity, the kind that pulled danger toward them no matter how deeply they were buried. And beneath the fear, something else had begun to take root inside her, a sense of duty. If the monks and those mysterious smugglers had risked everything to keep the silver safe, then she owed it to them to finish their work properly. She would uncover the full truth of the resistance, find who had hidden the treasure, and learn why it had been left behind. It wasn't about wealth anymore. It was about legacy and survival. One evening, as the last light bled from the horizon, Laura stood at the monastery's window and looked out across the valley. The fog had risen again, thick and white, swallowing the trees below. Somewhere out there, she knew, others were watching, waiting. But she wasn't the same woman who had arrived weeks ago, tired and desperate. She was stronger now, sharpened by fear and purpose. If they wanted the silver, they would have to face her and the history buried beneath these stones. Because some treasures, she was beginning to understand, were never meant to be owned. They were meant to be guarded. The storm arrived without warning. Gray clouds gathered over the Vermont hills, heavy and silent, until the first crack of thunder rolled through the valley like an omen. The wind howled across the hilltop, bending trees and slamming the monastery's shutters against its stone walls. Laura stood in the chapel, staring at the trapdoor beneath the altar. Rain lashed the windows, lightning illuminated the fractured stained glass, and in those brief flashes, the chapel looked alive, as if the ghosts of its past were watching her. She could feel it in her bones now. The monastery was trying to tell her something. The more she uncovered, the more it seemed to breathe. Every secret she revealed made the air heavier, the shadows longer. That evening, after tucking Marcus safely into bed, she descended once more into the crypt. The lantern's glow flickered as she stepped down the narrow stairs, her shadow following like a silent twin. The silver crates waited, still untouched. But tonight, Laura wasn't searching for treasure. She was searching for truth. Her eyes lingered on the shelf where she had found Brother Augustine's diary. It had felt out of place, hidden intentionally, yet easy enough to find if one were looking in the right way. There had to be more. The monks had been deliberate men, They wouldn't have left their story half told. Laura began examining the walls carefully, running her hands along the rough stone. Dust and cobwebs clung to her fingertips. The air smelled of age and iron. Then, as her hand pressed against one corner of the crypt, she felt it, a faint draft whispering from behind the wall. Her heart quickened. She fetched a small hammer and chisel from Robert's toolkit and began tapping along the mortar lines. After several careful strikes, one stone shifted, revealing a small hollow space behind it. Inside, wrapped in decayed linen, lay a bundle of letters sealed with red wax and bound by a thin cord. Her pulse raced as she pulled them free. The wax was stamped with falcon, the same symbol engraved faintly on some of the silver bars. She carried the bundle upstairs to the study, where she laid them out under the soft glow of a desk lamp. The paper was brittle but intact, the handwriting neat and formal. Most were written in French, a language she barely remembered from high school. With the help of translation tools and online references, she began deciphering them piece by piece. Each letter was addressed to Brother Augustine and signed by someone who called himself Falcon. The earliest letters dated back to 1941, written from occupied France. Falcon spoke of missions, of shipments hidden in plain sight, of coded routes used to transport resources from Maquis, the French resistance fighters. The tone was calm, strategic, and urgent, but the later letters grew darker. Falcon warned of betrayal, of a leak in their ranks, of German officers closing in on safe houses, and couriers vanishing. One line sent chills through Laura's spine. The silver must not fall into their hands. If the monastery is compromised, seal it beneath the altar. The world will forget, but God will remember. It was signed simply, F. Laura sat back in silence, the storm raging outside. These weren't just letters. They were confessions of a man who had lived in shadows, risking everything to preserve freedom. She realized something profound. The silver beneath her floor wasn't stolen. It had been rescued, smuggled away from the Nazis, meant to fund a resistance that had been snuffed out before the war's end. And Falcon, whoever he was, had trusted the monks to keep it safe. Lightning flashed outside, illuminating the walls. For a split second, Laura thought she saw a figure reflected in the glass, someone standing near the tree line, watching the monastery from the storm. She blinked, but the silhouette was gone. Her heart raced as she turned off the lamp and moved quietly to the window. The rain streaked across the glass, but there, far down the hill, faint headlights glowed through the fog. A car sat parked just beyond the gate. She watched for several minutes. It didn't move. When she finally stepped back, she realized her hands were trembling. She had been careful, discreet, but somehow they still knew she was here. Downstairs, the alarm Robert had installed blinked softly by the door, a small comfort against the weight of danger pressing from the dark. The next morning, Laura called a local historian at the university 2 towns over, posing as a researcher herself. She asked about wartime smuggling routes, about the falcon symbol, about any records connecting the monastery to European networks. The man hesitated, then mentioned a name that struck her like thunder. Falcon Enterprises, defunct since 1947, one the front company used to launder money for post-war recovery projects. It had been investigated after the war for missing assets, silver, gold, and art linked to European banks. The case had gone cold when evidence vanished. Her mind reeled. The letters weren't just personal. They were part of a network that had spanned continents. The silver wasn't simply resistance funding. It was wealth that had once belonged to nations, possibly even governments. If that was true, then the people chasing her weren't treasure hunters. They were part of something much bigger, maybe even connected to the remnants of those post-war networks still alive in the shadows. As she sat at her desk surrounded by letters, a realization settled over her like ice. She wasn't supposed to have found this. By opening that trapdoor, she had resurrected something the world had quietly chosen to forget. And now, the past was waking up. That evening, Robert returned. The storm had cleared, but unease hung thick in the air. He mentioned seeing unfamiliar vehicles parked near the road again, people pretending to take pictures of the valley. Laura knew what it meant. The watchers were back. She decided to move the letters and diary to a safer place. Late that night, After Marcus was asleep, she placed them in a waterproof case and hid them beneath loose stones in the monastery cellar, away from the silver. She kept only one letter with her, the first one Falcon ever wrote. Something about it felt important. That letter ended with a phrase she hadn't noticed before, faint and smudged but still legible under the lamp. If the burden must be kept beyond our reach, seek the light under St. Hilaire. Laura frowned. St. Hilaire, she remembered the name. It was carved into one of the stained glass windows in the chapel, now shattered. The figure of the saint had once held a lantern, now missing from the artwork, just a shadow where it used to be. Could it be another clue? Her thoughts spun with questions as she descended into the chapel once more, her lantern casting golden circles across the stone. She walked toward the broken window, tracing the remnants of the saint's image, the missing lantern and the faint inscription beneath it. When she brushed away the dust, a line of Latin text appeared, half erased but readable, Lux sub lapide. The translation struck her breathless. Light beneath the stone. Her pulse quickened. She turned, eyes darting across the chapel floor, and realized it wasn't just one trapdoor hidden there. The monks might have built more than one. Lightning flared outside, illuminating the floor in ghostly flashes. And in that instant Laura saw it. Faint outlines of another square in the stone, smaller, older, perfectly centered beneath the window. She knelt and touched it. It felt loose. Hollow. Somewhere deep inside, instinct whispered that she was about to find something even more powerful than the silver itself. Something the letters had called the light. But before she could lift the stone, a sound shattered the silence. A slow, deliberate creak from the front door. Someone had entered the monastery. The lantern flickered in her hand as she froze, every muscle tense. Rain began again outside, soft and steady. Footsteps echoed across the hall, moving closer. Laura extinguished the flame. Darkness swallowed her whole. The footsteps stopped just inside the chapel doorway. And in that moment of silence, broken only by the sound of her own heart, she realized something chilling. Whoever it was, they knew exactly where to find her. The air inside the monastery was still, unnaturally still. Only the faint hiss of rain against the windows and the rhythmic beat of Laura's heart broke the silence. She crouched behind one of the heavy pews, the lantern extinguished, her breathing shallow. The faint sound of footsteps echoed through the entryway, slow and deliberate, the weight of each step pressing into the floorboards like a countdown. Someone was inside. Lightning flared through the broken glass above the altar, momentarily revealing the outline of the trapdoor beneath St. Hilaire's window, the one she had just discovered. Then darkness fell again, swallowing everything. Laura's mind raced. Was it one of the intruders from before? The woman who had broken into her home? Or had Victor Ashford returned, the polite historian whose eyes had seemed too knowing? Whoever it was, they were moving with the certainty of someone who had been here before. The footsteps paused at the threshold of the chapel. Then came the faint creak of wood, the sound of the door closing softly behind them. Whoever this was, they didn't want to be seen entering. Lightning flashed again, and for a split second, Laura saw him. A tall man in a long dark coat stood near the altar, his face obscured by shadow. His gloved hand rested on the edge of the pew. When the light vanished, his silhouette remained etched in her mind, still, composed, and dangerous. He wasn't searching aimlessly. He was waiting. Laura stayed motionless, every muscle screaming to run. But she knew any sound would give her away. The storm outside masked only so much. The man's voice, calm and measured, broke the silence. He spoke softly, as though addressing the room itself. His tone carried authority, not a thief's desperation, but the composure of someone who believed they had every right to be there. Though she couldn't see his face, she could feel his eyes scanning the chapel, stopping on the spot beneath St. Hilaire's window, the same place she had been moments earlier. He knew. He walked slowly toward it, boots echoing against the stone. He knelt, ran his hand across the floor, and found the faint groove she had uncovered. The scraping of metal followed, the sound of a tool prying at stone. Laura's stomach twisted. He was lifting the second trapdoor. She couldn't see what he found beneath it, only the faint gleam of light as he shone a small flashlight into the opening. Whatever he saw made him pause. His breath hitched audibly, not in fear, but in recognition. Then he said a name under his breath, one that froze Laura's blood. Falcon. Her heart stopped. He knew the code name. He wasn't just an intruder. He was connected to letters, to the Resistance's lost network. The man stayed crouched for several moments, studying what lay beneath the hidden stone. Laura shifted slightly, trying to see. The faint light caught the edge of something metallic, but smaller than the silver bars. Perhaps a box, or an artifact. Then, without warning, his flashlight beam swung across the room, directly toward her. For a moment, the light pinned her like a hunted animal. He didn't shout or move aggressively. He simply stood and said something quiet, words she couldn't make out over the storm. But his tone carried recognition, not surprise. He had expected her. Laura bolted. She sprinted from behind the pew, her feet slipping on the wet stone floor, the flashlight beam following her as she ran. The chapel door loomed ahead, and just as she reached it, the man's voice echoed behind her, calm, assured, and chillingly certain. She didn't wait to hear more. She threw open the door and fled down the hall, her bare feet slapping against the ancient tiles. The wind howled through the corridors, doors slamming open and shut as she ran. She darted into the stairwell, leading to the living quarters, heart hammering in her chest. Behind her, the man's footsteps followed at an unhurried pace. He wasn't chasing her. He was following, confident that she had nowhere to go. Laura reached the second floor and ducked into a storage room. She pressed her back against the wall, holding her breath. The monastery's old bones creaked with the storm, masking the faint sound of the steps below. For several long minutes, there was nothing, only the sound of rain and wind. Then came a soft knock, not on the door, but on the wall opposite her. Her heart lurched. He was just outside. She clutched the lantern, ready to swing if he came closer, but the knock didn't come again. Instead, she heard his voice, closer now, speaking low and clear through the wood. "You don't know what you've uncovered." Her pulse thundered in her ears. "You think it's treasure," he continued, his tone neither cruel nor angry, simply certain. "But it's not. It's a key. And there are people who would do anything to take it." The footsteps retreated. The sound of the front door opening followed, then the low rumble of an engine starting outside. Laura stayed frozen until the noise faded completely. When she finally stepped out, the monastery felt emptier than ever, a hollow shell echoing with warnings. She returned to the chapel at dawn. The trapdoor beneath St. Hilaire's window was open. The small compartment had been disturbed, but not fully emptied. Inside, she found a rusted tin box, its lid bent slightly where the man had tried to pry it open. She lifted it carefully. It was heavy, cold, and sealed with the same falcon symbol. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, she found a small metal cylinder engraved with coordinates and a seal marked Vichy 1943. Alongside it lay a photograph, black and white, faded with age. It showed a group of men in clerical robes standing beside uniformed soldiers. In the corner, circled faintly in pencil, was one face she recognized immediately. The same man who had broken into her chapel the night before, only younger, decades younger. Her breath caught. He wasn't just connected to the story. He had lived it. It didn't make sense. The photo was at least 80 years old, but his features were unmistakable. The same sharp eyes, the same presence. She felt her mind reel against an impossible thought. Was it a relative, a descendant, or something else entirely? The tin box contained one last thing, a folded note written in the same neat handwriting as the letters. If you are reading this, the burden has found another guardian. Trust no emissary of Falcon. The network is not what it once was. Laura read the words again and again, her mind spinning. The network, the burden, the key. She realized now that the silver had never been the true prize. It was a decoy, perhaps even bait. The real secret, whatever it was, lay within the coordinates on that metal cylinder. As sunlight broke through the clouds and streamed across the cracked chapel floor, Laura knew one thing for certain. She couldn't stay here any longer. The man in the chapel would return. Others would follow. And if the silver was meant to protect something greater, Then the only way to finish what the monks had started was to leave the monastery behind and follow the trail they had left. Far away from this hill, beyond the horizon, waited the truth, a truth powerful enough to change everything. The morning after the intruder's visit dawned in uneasy silence. Fog coiled around the monastery like a living thing, wrapping its ancient walls in gray. Inside, the air felt hollow, stripped of comfort. The chapel, once her refuge, had become a vault of unanswered questions. Laura sat at the wooden table in the study, the tin box open before her. Inside, the metal cylinder gleamed faintly in the half-light, a relic of another century. Its engraving seemed to shift under her gaze, as if resisting being read. She turned it slowly in her hands, tracing the stamp numbers. 47 degrees 18 minutes north, 6 degrees 1 minute east. Coordinates. She pulled out an old laptop and typed them in. The result made her stomach flip. A small region in eastern France, near the border of Switzerland. The Jura Mountains. The place was remote, mountainous, dotted with forests and ruins. The kind of region where people could hide from the world, where secrets could sleep undisturbed for decades. It made sense. Falcon's letters had all originated from occupied France. The silver had been smuggled out, buried beneath the monastery as a last resort. But the coordinates, perhaps they led to what the monks were truly protecting. Laura stared at the map until the lines blurred. Her life had changed so completely in a matter of weeks. From a struggling single mother trying to survive to custodian of a secret older than her country's memory of war. And now, she had to make a choice. Stay and wait for danger to return, or go and face whatever truth waited across the ocean. By noon, her mind was made up. She called Robert. Her voice trembled as she told him she needed to leave for a few weeks. An excuse about family matters, just enough to keep suspicion away. He promised to keep an eye on the property. That evening, while Marcus slept, she packed what little they could carry. Documents, the cylinder, the letters, the diary, and just enough money for the journey. The silver, heavy and dangerous, would stay buried. She resealed the trapdoor with fresh mortar, hiding the fortune once more beneath stone. At dawn, she and her son drove away from the monastery. The fog swallowed the road behind them, erasing the hilltop from view as if it had never existed. For the first time in weeks, Laura felt both terrified and free. The journey, the trip across the Atlantic, was long and exhausting. The flight was filled with anxious silence, Marcus asking questions she didn't have answers for. Laura told him they were going on an adventure, that his gray-tanned inheritance had one more story to tell. When they landed in Geneva and rented a small car to drive toward the French border, the world felt older, quieter. Snow dusted the mountain ridges, and narrow roads wound through forests so dense they seemed to swallow the light. Every mile brought her closer to the coordinates. The numbers led her to a remote region near a village called Montrayon, a cluster of stone houses clinging to the side of a valley. Locals spoke little English, their wary eyes following her car as she passed. To them, she was just another outsider chasing ghosts in a place where the past still whispered. The coordinates ended at the base of a crumbling fortress, or what remained of one, a forgotten outpost from centuries ago, hidden deep in the forest and reclaimed by moss and ivy. She parked nearby, heart pounding, and studied the terrain. The coordinates were exact, leading her to a spot within the fortress walls. There was no clear path, only a scatter of fallen stones and roots twisting through the ruins. As she climbed over debris, she noticed faint engravings on one of the surviving walls. The same falcon symbol. Her breath caught. She was in the right place. Lightning flickered far away, storm clouds gathering once again over the peaks. The air was thin, charged with electricity. Marcus stayed in the car while she explored, promising to stay hidden. Laura made her way toward what might have been the fortress's cellar, a narrow tunnel partially blocked by rubble. She cleared debris with her hands, scraping her fingers raw, until she could squeeze through the opening. Inside, the darkness felt ancient, almost sacred. Her flashlight beam caught remnants of wooden beams, crumbled stone, and arched alcove at the far end. There, embedded in the wall, was a rusted metal door, small, circular, and sealed shut. Its center bore the falcon symbol, identical to the one on the cylinder. Laura's breath came fast. She held the cylinder beside the symbol and noticed it wasn't just decorative. It was a keyhole. Her hands trembled as she slid the cylinder into place and turned. A deep mechanical click echoed through the tunnel. Dust rained from the ceiling as the ancient mechanism unlocked. The door creaked open, revealing a chamber beyond, a hidden vault. Laura stepped inside, her flashlight sweeping across the room. Shelves lined the walls, each stacked with boxes of documents, journals, and ledgers preserved in metal casings. Maps covered in coded markings lay scattered across a stone table in the center. She approached slowly, lifting one of the ledgers. The writing was in French and German, dated between 1939 and 1945. Her pulse quickened as she realized what she was holding. Financial records, names, transfers. This was no monastery archive. It was a ledger of the Falcon Network, a complete record of the smuggling operation that had funneled resources out of occupied Europe. And not just silver. Gold, art, currency, bonds, names of families, resistance members, sympathizers, politicians. Every secret account, every covert deal laid bare in ink. The vault wasn't a treasure room. It was a confession. Laura realized the silver she had found was just one fragment of a much larger web, a safeguard, a decoy, perhaps even ransom. The monks hadn't just been hiding wealth. They were protecting the identities of those who had risked their lives in the underground network. Falcon had created a legacy not of greed, but of truth, and the truth had been buried because it was too dangerous to reveal. The footsteps of history had echoed all the way to her hilltop monastery in Vermont, where that truth had lain waiting untouched for a new custodian to uncover. As she leafed through the pages, she saw names that sent chills down her spine: banking families, intelligence officers, American firms, even names tied to governments that had rebuilt Europe after the war. The network hadn't ended. It had been absorbed, disguised within legitimate systems of power. If this ledger reached the world, it would expose generations of secrets. And that was why people were willing to kill for it. Thunder cracked overhead, shaking the stones above. The air in the vault seemed to shiver with the echo. Laura knew she couldn't stay here long. She took photographs of the ledgers, scanning as many pages as her phone's light would allow. Each picture felt heavier than the last, the weight of truth pressing down on her. Then she heard something, a voice, distant, echoing through the tunnel. Her heart stopped. She turned off her light and listened. The voice was calling her name. Not shouting, calling, as if whoever was knew exactly where she had gone. She froze. Marcus. Without another thought, she grabbed the cylinder, stuffed her phone into her pocket, and sprinted back through the tunnel. Her flashlight beam flickered wildly as she ran. The storm outside had reached the fortress, wind roaring through the trees like the breath of something ancient. When she crawled out into the open air, the forest was alive with thunder. The car door was open. Marcus was gone. Only one thing lay on the driver's seat, a folded piece of paper, drenched from the rain. It read, "You shouldn't have come here. The key was never yours." Her hands trembled as she looked up at the storm, fear hollowing her chest. The coordinates had led her to the truth, but someone had been waiting for her all along. And now, they had taken the only thing that mattered more than the secret itself. Her son. The storm raged through the mountains like a living creature. Wind tore at the trees, rain lashed against the stone ruins, and thunder rolled endlessly across the valley. But none of it mattered to Laura. Her hands trembled as she clutched the rain-soaked note from the car seat, her eyes fixed on the empty space where her son should have been. The world seemed to collapse around her, every sound fading into a dull roar. Marcus was gone. The words on the paper burned in her mind. The key was never yours. The silver, the letters, the ledger, none of it mattered now. Nothing mattered but finding him. Lightning split the sky, and for an instant, she thought she saw movement on the path leading deeper into the forest, the glint of headlights vanishing between the trees. She ran, her boots slipping on mud, heart pounding with a primal desperation she hadn't felt since the day she buried her mother. Branches clawed at her arms as she sprinted down the winding path, her breath ragged. Every step echoed with the same thought. They took him because of me. She reached a clearing where the forest opened to an old gravel road. Tire tracks cut fresh grooves into wet earth, leading toward a cluster of lights flickering faintly in the distance. A compound, perhaps, or a secluded estate hidden in the valley. She followed them. The rain turned the road to sludge, her clothes clinging to her skin, but she didn't stop. Every instinct screamed that time was running out. Whoever had taken Marcus had left that note not as a threat, but as a message. They wanted her to come. By the time she reached the valley floor, the storm had eased into a steady drizzle. Through the fog, she saw it. An old industrial complex, long abandoned, its gates rusted and half collapsed. Faded French signage hinted it had once been a factory during the war. A single light glowed inside one of the buildings. Laura slipped through the broken gate and crept toward the entrance. The rain masked her footsteps as she approached a large warehouse door left slightly ajar. Inside, the air smelled of oil and dust. Water dripped from the ceiling in steady rhythm. At the far end of the room, a table stood beneath a hanging light, and on that table lay the metal cylinder, the Falcon insignia gleaming under the lamp. A man stood beside it. Even before he turned, she knew it was him, the intruder from a chapel. His posture was unmistakable, his movements calm, measured, deliberate. He looked up slowly, meeting her eyes with an expression that was not anger, but sorrow. "Mrs. Mitchell," he said quietly, "you shouldn't have come here." She didn't speak. Her gaze darted to the side, searching for Marcus. A faint sound, a muffled voice, came from the shadows behind the machinery. Her son was tied to a chair, unharmed but terrified. Laura's breath caught, relief mixed with fury. The man raised a hand gently. "He's safe. For now." His voice was controlled, but beneath it lingered exhaustion, the kind that belonged to someone who had carried too many secrets for too long. "You've seen the vault," he continued. "You've seen the ledgers. Do you understand what you touched?" Laura stared at him, rainwater dripping from her hair, her chest heaving, the words caught in her throat. "The silver, the letters, they were never meant for the world," he said. "The resistance ended. But Falcon's network didn't die. It changed. It became something else. Governments, corporations, banks, all built on what we hid. You exposed the chain that links them." He stepped closer. "And now they'll come for you. For the boy. For everyone who's seen the truth." His eyes softened, regret flickering across his face. "That's why we sealed it. Not to protect treasure, but to protect the world from what happens when it's found." Lightning flashed outside, illuminating his face, and in that instant Laura saw the truth. He wasn't 80 years old. His features hadn't aged in decades. The photo from 1943 wasn't of his ancestor. It was of him. The man before her was Falcon. Her mind reeled. "It's not possible," she whispered, though no words left her mouth. He seemed to read her thoughts. "Some burdens last longer than a lifetime," he said softly. "I've kept the network secret alive, guarding it from those who would twist it. But when you opened that trapdoor, everything I buried began to move again." He glanced at the cylinder. "You were never meant to find it. But fate has a cruel sense of irony." Behind him, Marcus stirred, calling for her weakly. Falcon turned his gaze toward the boy. "He's brave," he said quietly. "Like you. And that's why I can't let you take the key." Laura's heart pounded. What key? She thought, the words echoing silently in her mind. Falcon stepped back toward the table. "The coordinates you followed were a decoy, a path for anyone reckless enough to chase ghosts. The true vault lies somewhere else. What you found was only the mirror, not the source." He reached into his coat and pulled out a small silver emblem identical to the Falcon seal on the cylinder. He placed it on the table beside the metal tube. "The real ledger, the one that could destroy nations, is bound to the seal, and the moment it's opened, the balance the world rests on will collapse." He looked at her then, truly looked, his expression weary, haunted. "You wanted to save your son. I wanted to save the world. Maybe both are impossible." Thunder rumbled, closer this time. Before Laura could move, headlights cut through the fog outside. Multiple vehicles. Doors slammed. Shouts followed. Falcon's eyes darkened. "They've found us." He turned to Laura, voice urgent now. "Take the boy. Run to the north side. There's a service tunnel. Go now. She hesitated, torn between fear and disbelief, but one glance at Marcus broke her paralysis. She rushed to him, untying his hands. His eyes filled with tears, but she whispered reassurance through her trembling breath. Falcon turned toward the door, pulling a weapon from his coat, an old revolver, antique yet functional. He glanced back once, his expression unreadable. "History will never thank either of us," he said quietly. The first shot shattered the silence. Laura grabbed Marcus's hand and ran. The sound of chaos filled the warehouse. Shouts, gunfire, the metallic ring of bullets striking stone. The world blurred as she and her son sprinted through the corridor Falcon had indicated. She could hear him still fighting behind them, one man holding back an entire storm of shadows. They reached the tunnel, a narrow passage that smelled of rust and earth. Laura half-dragged Marcus through it, every step echoing in the dark. Behind them, the warehouse exploded into fire. The blast threw dust and debris through the tunnel entrance, sealing it shut. They stumbled out the other side, gasping for air. The night sky glowed orange in the distance. Marcus clung to her. "Mom," he whispered, "is he gone?" Laura stared at the rising smoke above the forest. "I don't know," she murmured. In her pocket, something cold pressed against her leg. She reached inside and pulled it out, the small Falcon emblem Falcon had placed on the table. She hadn't realized she grabbed it in the chaos. The metal felt impossibly heavy. When she turned it over, faint words were engraved beneath the symbol. Custodia Lucas, Keeper the Light. The meaning hit her like a whisper from the past. The burden had passed again. The secret wasn't gone. It had simply changed hands. Laura looked toward the horizon, where dawn began to break over the mountains. The light touched the fog, turning it silver. She understood now. The silver she had found beneath her chapel wasn't just a fortune. It was a message, a warning that some treasures are too powerful for one person or one lifetime to possess. Falcon had guarded it for 80 years. Now, the world had chosen her. As she and Marcus began the long walk toward the nearest village, the wind carried faint echoes of the monastery bells, though they had been silent for decades. And somewhere far away, buried beneath stone and history, the true ledger still slept, waiting for its next guardian. The past was not finished. It never is.